Have you ever wondered what it is like to have great clarity and focus? Have you ever asked yourself how you can get back after big setbacks? Today's guest on podcast is a man with great commitment to his goals, an amazing level of resilience, and a man with a very big heart. Welcome, Alan P. Hill. It's a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much, Joakim. Good to be here.
Thanks. And Alan, could you share a little bit about your background for the listeners so they could get to know you a bit?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'll keep it short and brief, but I'm sure you guys who are joining us here on YouTube or wherever you're joining us from just want to know a little bit about who this guy is sitting next to you or opposite you in front of Zoom. Yeah, very briefly, my name is Alan P. Hill. I was born and raised in the southeast of England. I'm married to my beautiful Brazilian wife, Barbara, and we have two lovely children, Jensen and Lando, that live here with us in the south of Portugal in the Algarve. So that's my family, where I live. But in terms of my background in my professional life, I am a serial entrepreneur, a property investor, an international trainer, and a coach. And those are the things that I love doing. I love to change people's lives. I've been investing in property for many, many years. I've created a multi-million pound property portfolio, as well as having property in Portugal and Brazil. And I have created a multi-million pound business, not once, but several times in the UK. And now I help coach other people, particularly helping them work on their business finances or in terms of investing in property. So that's a little bit about me in terms of my professional background.
Lovely, Alan. And I gotten to know you through several seminars I've been
Yes,
attending here on stage. And I also heard about your story that you started from nothing, but you've been able
that's right.
to create that financial freedom. Could you tell us about that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's probably relevant to mention like the big challenge that I had back in 2004, which is coming up for 20 years ago now. It was 2004, and the short version of this story is that there was a tragedy in my family home. A fire destroyed my home where I was living. I was living with my mum and my dad. I'd just gone back home after university, and my siblings as well. There's four of us kids, and in the apartment below where I was living at the time, also my sister lived with her son as well. And so the whole lot was destroyed by fire. And very sadly, my mum didn't make it out of the fire. And so, really, this was just one of those life's moments that just caused me to really be shaken up quite a lot. I was homeless, and my family were homeless. I didn't have anything physical stuff, none of those souvenirs from travels or photos from our history or family heirlooms or anything. It was all gone, and we were reduced to living initially in a hotel room or in friends' floors, and just wearing clothes that had been gifted to us from the church or whatever we could get our hands on. So from that low point where I had absolutely nothing, it was really a challenge for me, and I just I just felt in my heart that I wanted this to not just be for nothing. So I made a decision. I made a decision that said, look, this has had to happen for a reason. My mum passed away, and it felt like it was early and a wrong timing and all of that. But ultimately, everyone dies. And so I was so shocked and challenged because I'd lost everything, and my mum had died earlier than I was expecting her to. So I wanted to kind of create some meaning around that. And so this is one of the topics I think we'll probably touch on today, is about creating meaning around challenges. And I made a decision to say, how can I take what's happened to me and turn it into something that ends up being a force for good? Not something that I would want to happen again, but since it's happened, since the price has been paid, since the tragedy has occurred and I've suffered it already, what can I do to use that suffering to transmute it, to transform it, and to change it into something good for myself, my family, but then ultimately for other people? Which is where I tied it into my vision for what I wanted for my future. Is just like yourself, Joachim, you want to help change the lives of other people, and that's why we're aligned in this and why we've managed to connect. I wanted to change people's lives. I didn't just want to do it for me. I wanted a legacy, something bigger than me, so I could look back and say, look, yes, my mum passed away in that moment, but actually, as a result of that, I've made a series of decisions that have led to me changing my life, living my life in ways that I never would have imagined, and helping others to do the same. So that's really where it kind of the shift happened for me in terms of my life, and starting from a challenge to build up to creating multiple businesses, going to create a multi-million pound property portfolio, and all of that starting from literally being homeless. In the UK after a fire, not entirely homeless. We had friends and family to stay on the floors, and eventually we got put up in a hotel for a while, but it was just us on our own, and very challenging time. So that's the basis of really what kind of caused me to, that was the fire that forged me from this challenging situation, and how I chose to use that going forward, or one of the challenges I've had, of which there have been more than one, of course.
Yeah, and Alan, it's incredible because as you shared there, there's so many potential roadblocks that could really stop you, that you could be caught up in
Right.
with, okay, that fire, you talked about the meaning, you talked about these expectations, like my mom died earlier than you wanted, which it really touched my heart. So condolences for that.
Thank you.
And despite the circumstances, you found a bigger meaning. Can you elaborate upon how have you been able to build this kind of resilience to hold yourself to a higher standard, I guess would be a good term here, because you invoked some really great techniques with that meaning, being aware of the expectations, asking yourself those questions that you
Yeah.
shared. How have you been able to really develop such kind of resilience and that kind of mode to be able to, yeah, shift the focus around?
Well, thank you, Joakim, for asking. So, first of all, I've got to be absolutely real with you, and I think it's only fair to your listeners to be as open as possible about this. So, of course, I struggled in those first few years, and I felt a bit lost, and didn't know. It wasn't something that instantly happened. I think the fairly instant thing was like an internal resolution, just a decision, like I don't want this to be for nothing. So the initial commitment was a commitment to say, how can I'm not going to stop until I find a way to help have some meaning that's bigger than just me and my sadness and my grief, because it was difficult, and there were times where I felt self-pity, or felt terrible, and my confidence was low, and all of this sort of a thing. Who I am now is very different to who I was then. Perhaps there is who I am now is still that same Alan, but there have been a lot of rough edges that have been knocked off, and I've gone through a process of personal development and refinement. So to say that I've had resilience, part of me wants to sort of say, well, hold on, I'm just human like everybody else, and that it has been tough. So sometimes I feel like, I think Joseph Campbell talked about it when he talks about the hero's journey. And some heroes are called to their journey not by their own choice, and other people choose to take a step forward on that journey and say, I'm going to do this, and it becomes a huge challenge. So, I think there were both elements of that with me. The element that I didn't choose was the fire and the circumstances I found myself in. But then there was the element of choice of saying, I want to embark on a journey of personal development. I want to become a business owner. I want to become a property investor, and I want to be the best that I can be. And I want to be financially successful. And all of these things were kind of, a desire to just make something really good happen that maybe the old me wouldn't have done. So to your question about how I did it, it was a combination of things. One was based on some of the learnings that I'd taken. Actually, Anthony Robbins was also a key influence in me in the early days. I know you're also, a great follower of him. Robert Kiyosaki, another incredible influence on my life in more than just one way. He's the reason I met my wife. I met Barbara, my wife, at a Robert Kiyosaki event in London back in 2010. And just recently this year, it kind of fulfilled a nice cycle where I ended up standing on stage together with him at the National Achievers Congress in exactly the same venue where I met my wife and where I saw him, I think, for the first time as well. So I followed these greats. I studied Stephen Covey, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I came on to T. Harv Eker, and all of these great names, Brian Tracy, all of these great names that are out there, that are really, to help us to grow and to develop. And these are people that have been around for many years. And of course, now there's the likes of yourself, myself, the younger ones that are coming through. Ultimately, eventually, some of these greats will pass away, and we have to carry that torch on as leaders in our communities for people that want to change their lives and take steps forward. So if I just say it like this, I used to be more, I've changed a bit now, but I used to be just a left brainer, very numbers oriented, very logical, also skeptical, which meant that I was a bit closed to certain things. But with that left brain, I became a kind of very analytical numbers kind of a guy. So using this analogy, I would say, if you treat my life like a stock market, like everybody's life has ups and downs, and you're in this graph, and then one day the fire happens, it's like boom, drops down to like whatever rock bottom is, 0 or minus 100. Certainly it was like a negative, like a stock market crash, if you want to use that analogy in a personal level. And so the reason I do that is not just to sort of make it very callous and hard and numbers based, because it wasn't just about money, it was about me as a person. But if you imagine that you could put that on a chart and it dropped down to 0, what happened is after the next 1 to 2 years, is I gradually got back to something like about where I was before. I had this trajectory of gradual increasing improvement, like most young people do. I'd been to university, I was very blessed with that experience. I'd come back, I'd gotten a job, just started out in life. And then, so I was on this like little growth trajectory, but I was very cautious, very risk averse, kind of fearful in a way, which is probably why I ended up living back at home with my family, because I was too nervous to go out on my own in London after university there and start to try and make it work for myself. I may have done if I'd achieved getting one of those coveted graduate jobs with one of the big employers, but I didn't, you see. So coming back to this crash, I was like, okay, I gradually got back to kind of like where I'd been before, thereabouts. It's never quite the same, but something in the realms of, okay, I'm sort of recovered. I've got a place to live. I've got a job again, because after the fire 3 months later I lost my job. So all sorts of challenges that some people would just knock them for six, and it did me. So when I got to here again, I was thinking, hold on, Alan, I smashed down to rock bottom. I gradually got back up, but like, do I need to stop? Or could I start from the bottom where I was and carry on going to here and just keep going above that line? So if this is that line, I've dropped below it, and then I got to here again, why stop there? Why not keep going? So I started saying, what kind of decisions would the new Alan, who wants a new life, make that the old Alan wouldn't have done, that I can in my mind directly attribute to, here's the reason, it's because of the fire, because my mum passed away. So this new thing that I've done, I'm going to attribute to this new decision that I wouldn't have made if it weren't for saying, I want my life to be different so that I can give some meaning to my mum's passing. So as a result of that, I started business and I started investing in property. And then one of the big things that I remember just a couple of years later was I became a pilot. So I took my private pilot's license in Long Beach, Los Angeles in California. I went out there and got my pilot's license. And the reason I did that was because, to me, that was something that someone up here did. And I was down here. It's like, little old me, become a pilot. But then if I could do that, what else could I do? That was like a exciting adventure that would challenge me and make me have a bit of lust for life come back again. So I thought, right, let's do that. And so that was one good analogy. Now I do have a pilot's license, but I didn't intend to become a professional pilot. I just wanted to say, those are those people there. Can I possibly do that? Can I challenge myself to go there? Old Alan would not have done this. Why? Because old Alan would have said, I'm spending money that I've just made in business, my first bit of profit, on something I'm not going to get a return on. It's not going to be for my career. It's kind of just going to be for me. But I decided to do it anyway. And that was the example of being new Alan, making new decisions to take my life above the line and then continue going with other decisions thereafter. So I'll hand back over to you in a sec for a question or any comeback on this. But the last thing I want to say about that line and the drop below and the recovery and the steps beyond into business, into property investing, into becoming a pilot, was that the last piece of it, which is really how I started my, this is how we met, Joakim, is I decided to take a journey of personal development and training so that I could train others. And so I embarked upon this tour around the world. It meant to be 6 months. It ended up 2.5 years traveling, and we can talk more about that later if you want, but I traveled 23 countries in 27 months. And as I was going, I was teaching people about these lessons that I'd learned about financial freedom and success. And then I got picked up by Success Resources and put on their stages, which is how we met. And so all of these things that I did was so that in terms of the training and the telling other people, and why I'm happy to be here with you today on your video cast, is because part of that decision that I made was not just to do things for me or even me and my family or my future family that I didn't yet have. It was to share this message that you don't have to wait for a challenge to happen to you, to drop to rock bottom, to take this lesson and to start using it for yourself. You can borrow my story and realize, oh, if I'd ever hit rock bottom, would I want to do the same? Do I want to live my life differently? Do I want to take new decisions and step forward in my life? If so, who needs a house fire to happen when Alan just made a decision? The house fire was the trigger for that decision. I'm offering you and your listeners the chance to take my trigger as your trigger. So you don't have to pay the price and wait for a challenge to knock you for six to make a new decision, to become a new person, the person that you always wanted to be, and have that vision of yourself as doing things that you never imagined you could do. So that's a little bit about how I interpreted those life's events, and the key lesson I think probably was in proactivity as opposed to reactivity. And I learned that from Stephen Covey's, I think it's habit number one from, if I'm not wrong, from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So I hope that gives you a rounded account of some of my points of view on resilience and bounce back from some of the big challenges that I had.
I love that you elaborated, Alan, because there's so many great distinctions, and you just sharing how you're able to keep yourself going with the vision and yourself asking those questions. I'm really curious with these questions you've been asking yourself, like you shared, okay, if I can do this, like with the pilot license, what else is possible?
Exactly.
Like even earlier before that, like how can I make this something more than just my grief and these things?
Yes.
What if there was something you could attribute that, or is there anything that you look back at that you see that how have you been able to like develop that, what should say, like sensory acuity or awareness or presence with yourself to be able to catch your pattern? Because so many people, they go on in like in a trance in their daily life, or they get lost in
Yeah.
their grief. Now having the pain of losing your home, losing your mom, having pain that's normal, like it shows that you're actually a human being. And now then it's a great ability that you've been able to catch yourself and saying, okay, there's actually more to life. How have you like been able to just condition in that presence with yourself, that awareness to be able to ask these questions instead of being lost in a trance and that suffering?
Yeah. So really question, actually, Joachim, what it shows me, and I think for all of your listeners or watchers can understand, to be able to ask that kind of a question already demonstrates a certain level of awareness within yourself to have that perception. So thank you for a great question, first of all, and for sharing that with us. So yeah, I think one key lesson that I took, I was reading 2 books at this time, or I'd read them prior to this. I can't remember exactly because the memories around the exact time of the fire are a little bit hazy. I think that's to do with perhaps stress or things that they say like PTSD, this kind of a thing, and it's a bit blurry, the exact memories. But I was reading a book either before or shortly after the fire. 2 books. One was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and the other one was The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama. And in those books, I discovered that my suffering wasn't unique. It wasn't just me. Other people had had suffering. Some people in the world had had a lot worse. And that was the basic principle of it. And so the idea that I took, I think it came from the Art of Happiness by Dalai Lama. And I think I was reading this actually. I was on a bus in America. I'd gone out to see some friends just to kind of reconnect with some good old friends that made me feel good. And I went to an Indian reservation where I'd done some volunteer work 25 years ago this year, actually, in 1998. And I don't know why I was going there. I just went there because I felt like I just needed to go back. And as I was going out there, I was like, why am I going here? Am I looking for, some sort of spiritual teacher to teach me something? I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I just knew I felt I wanted to go back to this Indian reservation where I'd been working with the kids. And I read this bit of, I think it was The Art of Happiness, where there was a story, very short version of it is that a woman, I mean, it's something like this. If you've read the book, you'll know I might be slightly getting it wrong, but the point is the same. Some woman goes to some priest and says, oh, my son is suffering, or has passed away or something like this. Could you help me come up with some potion or some solution that will help him or help ease the pain or something like this? Anyway, so this monk or this spiritual leader, whatever he was, said, yes, I can help you. First of all, you need to go to find me some salt that has come from a household where there's been no loss, like you've had no suffering. So she said, okay, fine, I'll do that. So she went around, and however long it took her, maybe it was a year, I don't know, but she went around and searching, and came back and was like, okay, I get it. That I couldn't find the salt. Not because I couldn't find the salt, but because everybody that I met had some story of suffering. And so in understanding that became part of her healing. So as I was going to this Indian reservation, reading this book on this, Greyhound bus going out to South Dakota from San Francisco, I think it was, I realized, that's why I'm going out there. I need to stop thinking about myself and stop focusing on myself and my pain and my suffering. It had been only a couple of months, maybe even a month or so since the fire, and I just needed to get away from my family and all of the responsibilities that I had and just get a break for me. And I didn't know why I was going there. I just knew I had to go. But then I was like, maybe it's about helping. And I remembered why I went to the res in the first place, the Indian reservation, the Cheyenne River Indian Reservation. I went there to serve. I went there as a camp counselor, as a volunteer camp counselor for the Sioux Indian YMCA. And we lived in teepees for 6 weeks. We had kids come in every week for summer camp, and it was wonderful. So I thought, right, I'll connect up, find somebody that can allow me to serve. And the short version of the story is I did. I found a way to help and see other people that had it worse than I had it, even though I just lost everything. Then I still was in some ways better off than many other people. And so that was a good lesson for me. So that was one of the realizations. And this is the very short version because there's a whole bunch of spiritual stuff behind this, and I went and participated in a sweat lodge on the reservation, and I came out and there was northern lights everywhere. And the long and short of the story is that someone in the sweat lodge said, I think I know you've lost your mum, no one's ever going to replace her, but I think there's going to be a new mother figure come into your life. And then literally just before I left the reservation, a lady that I'd met I knew her husband from previously working there and met with her and saw her kids. They essentially invited me to become part of their family with an adoption. So I became a Lakota, a member of the Lakota tribe. And so that profoundly touched me, made me realize, wow, there's, such an amazing spiritual world out there. So that was a form of awakening. They have, in the reservation, they have their traditions, and they have, many of them are Christian as well. So they have this amazing blend of culture and language and everything. And so it's just a wonderful thing to be a part of. I was kind of open to it, it didn't feel weird because the lady that had, sort of said, I'm going to adopt you, she had a Christian faith, but also she had this Lakota background. So it kind of made me feel comfortable because that's how I'd been raised. So all of that just really profoundly touched me. And, I just continued to read and to absorb and to learn and to study. And I've been affected a lot by Blair Singer and Robert Kiyosaki. I studied with them many times, sometimes in small study groups, 30 of us getting together in Scottsdale, Arizona, and studying about spirituality, and not just about faith, I mean just like us as human beings, and understanding all of these things that we can be connected to, and trances and stuff. So I understand why you asked the question. And sometimes something like this can snap us out of it. And I was ready to be snapped out of my trance, and I wanted that to happen. And so I continued to pursue that line. And this is the short version of the story for the sake of our time that we have here today. But I hope that's going some way to answering your question. But please feel free to ask if I've gone off track.
Yeah, definitely, Alan. Thanks. And I love how you shared that Well, we can step out of ourselves and get some perspective to life, which I imagine you've gotten through all that traveling. We can see that, wow, maybe we actually have a lot of blessings. And what I've gone through is, yeah, there are other people that have much less than me or going through even worse. So a lot of you share that. That is a big thing of getting perspective on life. And on your
Yeah.
journey, then okay, you knew you wanted more, and okay, you share this analogy that okay, kind of like a stock market, so there are ups and downs. What has been the biggest challenge regarding yourself as a person to overcome on your journey to be able to continue pursuing that vision that you talked about, that you made for yourself? You want to be something bigger for others, to turn that trigger the events of the past to not just be about your grief. What's been the biggest challenge regarding yourself that you had to overcome by being persistent on your journey?
It's a great question. Well, there's been several. I mean, here's the thing, like Robert Kiyosaki will say this, being in business, being an entrepreneur, being an investor, it's a spiritual game. He's not saying that like learning about the numbers and comparing ROI or yield, he's not saying that's a spiritual game. He's saying that if you want to invest, if you want to learn how to be the bigger person who invests at a bigger level, who grows business at a bigger level, you have to be the bigger person. And so you have to change within yourself. So there have been many challenges, many business related challenges, like from people just walking out to people, holding you over a barrel and suddenly demanding more money at last minute when you had no choice, or your business is failing, or for example, somebody set up a business in competition with mine while they were still working for me as the lead person in my business. So there've been all sorts of business challenges, monetary challenges, suddenly having to come up with 14 grand in an hour because my payroll was due and I'd miscalculated something many years ago before I got so good at business finance, which now I help people with the
What's
business
going on
finance.
inside, and what's happening inside of you then as all these external things happening, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because really, I think that this is where I'm coming to, is to say that all of these array of business challenges were, in a sense, just par for the course. Because if you're an investor, if you're a landlord, if you're an entrepreneur, these are just the sorts of challenges that you deal with. So some of them were just sort of a bit stressful and I dealt with them. But in some ways, the most stressful things were things like, what will other people think of me? When I closed down one of my businesses many years ago, like how will that, how does that impact upon me? So it's more about the inside, the internal stuff, than it is about the external stuff. But the external stuff can often be a trigger. But probably I'd say the biggest challenges have been just dealing with like closure of businesses. One I had to sell because it was really, we grew it to about £1 million turnover in 3 years, but it was just so not fun. I really didn't love it at all, and I just wanted to get rid of it. And I basically sold it for next to nothing. And then that was not a fun business in a sector I didn't like. It was recruitment in the healthcare sector. I had an education business that I had to close down as well. Some of those experiences were very painful. And what was going on inside of me were like, am I a failure? What will other people think about me? And things like this. So really, those kind of challenges were just the challenges on a personal level. And I know that everybody watching this can relate to thinking about what other people think about them, because we all do that, whether we like to admit it or not, whether we like to say, I don't care what other people think about us. It's like, oh yeah, well, probably you do, because there are probably some things I could ask you to do that you'd refuse to do because of what other people would think about you. So whatever you say, whatever lies you might be telling yourself, we all do care what other people think about us. And so that can be a trap to fall into, whether it's keeping up with the Joneses, whether it's comparing ourselves to other more successful people in business. So I think there have been a number of business challenges, but probably the biggest challenges that I've had haven't really been business. They've been in my personal life. And I know you might want to ask some of those questions as well about, I talked about the fire, and we haven't yet talked about my health and things like that, but I can go into more detail if you want. But I'd say the biggest challenges in doing well in business have been challenges that have come outside of business. Honestly, I've had a number of challenges in business that if I didn't have those external challenges, I'd be listing those right now. But by comparison, those just seem like business problems. And so from that perspective, it doesn't seem like such a big deal. So I don't know if you want me to go on or if you want to talk a bit more about those other personal stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear what you said there about the okay, what's going on with being afraid of their judgment because okay, what would other things think about me? Good. Before I ask a last question, because I'm conscious of time and respectful of your time as well. So I'm just curious, how have you been able to like silence that inner critic, that voice that come up when okay, you face that fear of judgment? Can you elaborate upon that before we move to the last question of today?
Yeah, well, I think it comes back to what you were talking about earlier, which is awareness. That's the first
Mm.
thing, the first step to change. The first part of it all is awareness. And so exercising that questioning of yourself. Now, for many people, this will be natural. I think it comes quite naturally to me, and I think that helps when it comes to my work with coaching people and so on. But I think that for those people that may be watching this that have it come naturally, well, great. You don't need perhaps too much help. But for those that find it more difficult, I would say I developed a system of asking myself questions. So maybe it wasn't natural actually, maybe it's as a result of the system. The truth is, I don't know. But I developed a system of reviewing myself initially once a quarter. Sometimes as I got busy with kids, it became just once a year. When I'd do a review every year, look at all of my notes from personal development, and I'd ask myself questions like, who am I? Who do I want to be? All the sorts of questions we hear from the greats like Tony Robbins, like T. Harv Eker, like all of these kind of things. And I asked those questions, the same questions again and again. And I would take an audit of myself. How have I actually been doing in each of these different areas of my life? My health, my family, my relationships, my business, my investing. How have I been doing? And if I needed to, I'd score myself, or I'd tick against goals I'd set and cross against ones that I hadn't. So I'd do an audit at least once a year. When I had more, less going on with kids in business, I might do it more like once a quarter. So by asking those questions, it doesn't matter if you don't know what questions to ask, first of all. You can just start with something like, who am I? Where am I now? Where do I want to be? And what's the gap between the two? That's enough. You can ask other questions like, what's been working well for me? What hasn't been working so well for me? What do I want to do differently as a result? And what have I learned about myself? Just those four questions in itself on a regular basis. So if you are struggling to to do this, you can just create a system like I did. I literally have a system printed out, a template that I get out once a year or once a quarter when I'm able to, and I read it through and I reflect and I set some quiet time and I have my favorite cup of tea and a little snack, or I take myself to a five-star hotel to feel the great atmosphere, or whatever I need to ask those questions, put my favorite music on, and I just focus often the answers will come out as you ask these questions informally. Maybe you're a religious person and you're in church or in the mosque or in whatever your faith based is. You might notice these things come up. So for me, it's about creating space in your life to allow the questions to come up or to ask those questions. If you think, gosh, that's a good question, you write it down and you use that same template every time. So maybe it comes naturally to me because I practiced again and again and again. And then now it just becomes part of who I am.
I love, Alan, that you elaborate with giving these practical examples and how transparent you are. Like it's about creating space. It's about, okay, it's a journey and you share what you're going through. I have one last question that I'm curious about. Maybe you want to add some final comments before we wrap this up. I'm just curious, Alan, what does it mean to you to live a fulfilled life?
Great question. Great question. Well, I think what it's not is what most of us live in most days, myself included, time to time, and I have to notice it and snap it out. Is what it's not is being in the trance. And when you mentioned about being in the trance, that's a great word that you've chosen to use, because that's when you're running in your subconscious and you're running by some things you may have chosen, like I've chosen to override some of my programming, and some of that's my decision, but some of it may still be there that I haven't been aware of and haven't changed yet. So it's not about living in a trance of what you think you need to do and all of that. For me, living a fulfilled life, I think, is about taking the time on a regular basis to just check in with yourself and say, ask the bigger questions like, who do I want to be remembered as? What do I want my kids, now that I've got kids, but how do I want my kids to remember me? These are sort of bigger questions that enable me to snap out of my trance, which we all get into, like thinking about work or money or other things. Or we can just get bothered about stuff that's going on in our environment, and so that's the trance. So living a fulfilled life, I think, is about regularly checking in with what is important to you, which changes as you go through your life. That's another important element to mention, is that as I'm now married and got kids, I always knew that things would change, and I knew that I wouldn't know how it would look, but I knew it would be different. So as I was creating my vision, my mission, it was for me then and there. And then as I developed to become a family man, I've adapted to things that I now want that I didn't want when I was younger and when I was single. But I did start, because I knew that was coming, I did start thinking about the wife and kids I didn't yet have. I was investing for them, for their future, even though I didn't know them yet and didn't have them yet. So really, back to your question of what's a fulfilled life, I think really it depends on the individual. But for me as a person, I consider myself a spiritual person. I consider myself a person who is awake and aware. I think that living a fulfilled life is being in a place where you feel, generally speaking, not every day, but generally speaking, more often than not, that you're doing what you feel that you're meant to be doing. So when I'm teaching on stage, I know I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing, and I love that. When I'm with my boys and sharing a good moment with them, I know that at that moment I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing, and I love that. Sometimes when I'm on stage, I'm away from my boys, and that's okay because it's not my whole life, maybe 10 times a year, and that's part and parcel of me doing what's part of my fulfilling life. So I do that for fulfillment. And I spend time with my boys for fulfillment. And I love helping people to invest and buy really super ROI properties. I find that fulfilling. So for me, it's about checking in with yourself on a regular basis to say, am I doing what I feel like I'm meant to be here doing? Am I doing what I'm here meant to be doing? You see a bird outside the window and they're singing, and they know that they're doing what they're meant to be doing. And so for me, I know that I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing when I have that feeling. And when I don't have that feeling, or I have a different feeling that feels like I'm out of kilter, that's a little flag to say, hold on a sec, are you living your life in fulfillment right now? And the answer is sometimes not. But by paying attention to those little flags, you can adjust and get back on course. So it's not about living in fulfillment 100% for the rest of life. It's about listening out, paying attention for those flags, and noticing as you go off track and readjusting to stay back within the tram lines of the sort of sense of fulfillment. Sometimes you veer out and you come back in, then you sort of wobble around inside, then you go out the other side. So it's about just noticing, do I feel like this is the life I'm meant to be living? And the answer for me is absolutely. Do I feel there's more to come? Yes. And for me, a flag is when I focus too much on I haven't done this yet, or what about that? Why am I not doing this? Rather than having a balance of also looking back and saying, these are the wonderful things I've done. And if I, passed away now, like almost happened to me a few years ago, then, well, actually, wow, I feel like I've very much led a very fulfilling life already. And I can certainly say hand on heart that I've done that in my past, and I have to remember that in my present, that my past is part of my present and my future is going to be part of my present. So it's about keeping it all in balance and not only focusing on the future, because you can't be happy in the future. You can only be happy and fulfilled now.
Alan, I love how you wrap that up with coming back to the present moment. I love that you've been very vulnerable with us and sharing practical tips by creating the space in your life so we can ask ourselves those questions to get out of this trance, elevate ourselves about ourselves. Like, is there something more than just my pain, getting that perspective to life through traveling, as you shared about? And that there are these days, yeah, as a stock market, there are ups and downs. So being able to have that awareness with ourselves. Alan, I feel very blessed. I'm very grateful that you came on and took out your time of your schedule to share your insights. If you have any last comments, things you want to add in, feel free to do that. And once again, just really appreciate all that knowledge and insights you shared, and that vulnerability and transparency and the journey of traveling the world, sharing your message as well, shows how big a heart you have, Alan.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, first of all, just to say, thank you very much for having me. Thank you to all of you who have been listening, watching, just consuming this content. We appreciate you. And do, of course, go ahead and support Joakim, like his channel. If you enjoyed this, he's got loads of other great interviews that he's been doing and he's continuing to do. So it's a privilege and an honor to be serving you, Joakim, here and your audience, and to be supporting you. And of course, it would be, oh, sorry, that's my phone. It would be remiss of me not to mention also myself. Of course, I'm always here to serve and to help, and your viewers can find me on alanphill.com if they want to know a little bit more about me. There's a little bit of information there. That's ALANP and then hill.com. You can come and find me if you want to reach out to me. I'm always there to help. I'm not a cheap coach by any means, but I do help people with property investing and with also on the personal development side. And so I thank you, Joakim, for your opportunity here to share a little bit about myself and put what I do out there. But also, I'd just like to, I guess my final comments would be just to ask your viewers to support you in what you're doing and come back if they enjoy this content. Keep learning, keep developing, keep growing. That's the one core message I would say. If you want to be successful in your personal, in any area of your life, plus your financial life, is continue. Never stop growing, never stop learning, never stop finding people that you connect with and hanging out with those. Keep reading books, keep watching podcasts or videocasts like Joakim's here. Keep surrounding yourself with people that do the same and move yourself to a high level if that's what you want and if you're ready for that. And if you're not, that's okay too. Just take on board what you've learned here from today. Take something out of this, make a note of it, and just make one commitment about what you're going to do in your life differently as a result of this. And please, if that's been something that's been inspiring for you, tell us what that is in the comments. Let us know, what have you decided to do differently in your life as a result of this? Have you felt inspired? Have you felt encouraged? If so, that is your gift to us, and we ask you for that gift because we are great receivers as well as great givers, and that'd be a wonderful gift for us to hear from you in the comments how this has moved you, inspired you, encouraged you, or excited you. So thank you, Joakim, for having me. Is there any final comments or questions that you have, or anything else that you'd like to ask?
I love that encouragement at the end here, Alan. Will put in the comments what distinctions you have, how this helps you, because what I found as well is writing things down, as Alan been an advocate for here as well, like writing things down is that it creates that awareness when you're able to formulate what's really going on.
Exactly.
So yeah, that might be that you get some aha moments, distinctions for yourself on how you can keep yourself on that journey towards where you want to go. Alan, it's been a pleasure. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk soon. Take care.
Thank you so much. Take care.